The vet room was quiet, too quiet. Only the soft hum of the fluorescent lights and the uneven, fading breath of the German shepherd broke the silence. Officer Quinleigh Brax sat on the cold tile floor, arms tightly wrapped around his partner, Jaxor. The dog's fur was still thick and warm, but the weight in his body told a different story. Jaxor's eyes, once sharp with instinct, now looked glassy and distant. Quinleigh could barely speak as he rested his cheek against the dog's head, holding on as if letting go meant the world would end. Across the room stood Dr. Mavelyn Krue, her clipboard held loosely in her hand. A quiet, thoughtful woman in her 60s, Mavelyn had seen countless animals pass through this very room, but something about the way Quinleigh held Jaxor made her pause. This wasn't just a handler and his K9. This was a bond forged by years of trust, danger, and something that went deeper than words. "I'm sorry I couldn't stop it," Quinleigh whispered, more to himself than to the vet or the world around him. "You were always faster than me, smarter, braver, and now I'm the one just watching." His voice trembled, thick with guilt. His fingers curled into the soft fur of Jaxor's neck, where the dog's collar used to be. The collar now rested in Quinleigh's pocket, too heavy to hold, too painful to wear. The clinic smelled of bleach and sterilized metal, but the scent of fur, blood, and quiet grief was stronger. Dr. Mavelyn took a step forward. "Quinleigh," she said softly, her voice respectful. "He's in pain. We can." "No," he interrupted without raising his head. "Not yet. Just not yet." His grip around Jaxor tightened, and then something shifted. Jaxor's paw moved slightly. At first, Quinleigh thought it was just another twitch, but the dog's chest rose again, slower, deeper. His eyes blinked once, then again. Quinleigh leaned back, eyes locked on Jaxor's face. "Mavelyn," he said cautiously, "did you see that?" Dr. Krue hurried over, her calm demeanor cracking into something more alert. She placed her stethoscope against the dog's side, listening. Seconds ticked by, her brow furrowed. His rhythm just leveled. "That shouldn't be happening," she muttered almost to herself. Quinleigh stared at Jaxor, heart pounding. He had come here to say goodbye. But now, something wasn't adding up. Quinleigh Brax stood frozen beside the examination table, eyes locked on the slow, steady rise of Jaxor's chest. Just minutes earlier, the vet had said there was no hope, that internal bleeding had taken over, and the dog's vitals were collapsing. But now, against every expectation, something had shifted. Something unseen. Jaxor wasn't just holding on, he was fighting back. Quinleigh knew that look in his partner's eyes. He'd seen it on the battlefield, in alleyways behind locked doors. It was the look of defiance. And it was back. Dr. Mavelyn Krue removed her stethoscope and stepped back, her expression unreadable. "This doesn't make sense," she said quietly, almost afraid to break the moment. "His heart rate has stabilized, and his temperature is climbing." Her hands moved instinctively toward the chart on the wall, scanning numbers that just moments ago told a different story. She wasn't ready to call it a miracle, not yet, but she had no explanation for what was happening. Quinleigh's hand moved gently to Jaxor's paw, twitched again, then curled slightly around his fingers. The wave of emotion hit hard. Not just relief, but confusion, awe, fear. "What if we're wrong?" he asked, voice hoarse. "What if it's not over?" Mavelyn didn't answer right away. She was too busy checking the 4-line, reevaluating every assumption she'd made in the past 12 hours. "Has he ever reacted like this under sedation?" she asked. Quinleigh shook his head. "No, never." There was a long pause, filled only by the beeping of the monitor and the tapping of Mavelyn's fingers on the metal table. "I want to run another scan," she finally said. "Tonight." Her tone was firm now, controlled, professional, but Quinleigh could hear the urgency beneath it. While she prepared the machine in the next room, Quinleigh leaned in close to Jaxor again. "You scared me, partner," he murmured, his thumb brushing the edge of the dog's muzzle. "I thought I lost you." Jaxor's breathing grew deeper, more rhythmic. It wasn't full recovery, not yet. But it was enough. Enough to raise questions. Enough to spark something new inside Quinleigh. A flicker of instinct he hadn't felt in weeks. Mavelyn returned, gloves on, scanner ready. Help me move him. As they gently lifted Jaxor, Quinleigh's mind began to race. What if the diagnosis had been wrong? What if something had been missed? And then another thought pushed through, colder, sharper. What if this wasn't just medical? What if someone wanted Jaxor gone? The scan room buzzed softly as the machine came to life. Cool light bathed Jaxor's body as he lay still on the examination table. Quinleigh Brax stood close, arms crossed tightly over his chest, eyes never leaving his partner. Dr. Mavelyn Krue adjusted the controls with practiced ease, but even she couldn't hide the tightness in her brow. She was looking for something, anything that might explain the impossible. The silence between them felt loaded, like the air just before a storm. The screen flickered, then began to display images in real time. Mavelyn studied them carefully, scrolling slowly, inch by inch. No signs of internal bleeding anymore, she said quietly. It's like it stopped on its own. She zoomed in on the chest cavity, tracing faint patterns with her finger on the glass. That's not normal clotting. This looks altered. Her voice trailed off, confused and slightly unsettled. Quinleigh stepped forward, narrowing his eyes. Altered how? Mavelyn hesitated. These patterns, these aren't natural. At least not for this stage of trauma. It almost looks like surgical work. She glanced at him. But no one's touched him since last night, right? Quinleigh nodded. Not unless someone got to him without my knowing. And suddenly, his mind went back to the briefing, to a face in the hallway. A technician he didn't recognize. He'd brushed it off at the time. But now? I want a second opinion, Mavelyn said, her voice sharp now. Someone off the record. Someone I trust. Quinleigh didn't argue. His instincts, honed by years in law enforcement, were screaming now. This wasn't just strange, it was wrong. He looked down at Jaxor, who was breathing steadily, still weak, but present. Whatever had happened to him, it hadn't been natural, and someone might not have wanted him to survive. As Mavelyn began exporting the scan files to her private drive, she mentioned a name quietly. Xandriax Colt, a retired veterinary pathologist. She's brilliant, but she doesn't take calls anymore. Not since her license was suspended over a disputed autopsy. Quinleigh raised an eyebrow. Disputed by who? Mavelyn answered without looking up. By the government. The room fell silent again, but the implications were loud. Before they could speak further, the clinic's front door buzzed. Someone had entered. Mavelyn stiffened. No one else was supposed to be there at this hour. Quinleigh instinctively reached for the sidearm on his belt, his body tensing. The screen behind them still showed Jaxor's scan, the strange, surgical-like patterns glowing faintly in the dim light. Someone else knew Jaxor was still alive. The soft chime of the front door echoed unnaturally through the clinic. Both Quinleigh Brax and Dr. Mavelyn Krue stood completely still, their eyes locked for a split second. It was after midnight. No appointments. No emergency calls. No staff. Whoever had just come in wasn't expected, and that alone set every nerve in Quinleigh's body on edge. He stepped silently toward the hallway, motioning for Mavelyn to stay close to Jaxor and keep the scan files hidden. Footsteps followed. Slow, deliberate. Too heavy for someone lost. Too calm for someone in distress. Quinleigh drew his weapon, holding it low and tight, as he moved down the corridor toward the reception area. The fluorescent lights flickered above, casting faint shadows on the tile floor. When he reached the corner, he stopped, listening. A rustle. Papers? A drawer opening? Someone was inside, and searching for something. He rounded the corner quickly. Freeze! He ordered, voice firm and sharp. The figure standing behind the front desk didn't flinch. A woman, tall, dressed in a long dark coat, turned slowly with her hands raised. Easy, she said in a calm, measured tone. My name is Lexandria Vane. I'm not here to hurt anyone. Quinleigh didn't lower his weapon. Then why are you breaking into a closed clinic after hours? Lexandria stepped forward slightly, her eyes steady. Because I know what they did to your dog. That stopped him. His grip loosened just a little, but his eyes narrowed. You've got 5 seconds to explain. She reached slowly into her coat and pulled out a small black device. A storage chip. That scan? The one showing the irregular patterns in Jaxor's chest? I've seen it before. Exactly like that. On another K9. 2 years ago. He didn't survive. Back in the exam room, Mavelyn kept Jaxor calm, her eyes on the door. She could hear voices but not the words. Jaxor stirred slightly beneath the blanket, his ears twitching in response to something only he could sense. The dog's breathing was steady, but his pulse was rising, a stress response. He recognized something, or someone. Quinleigh finally lowered the weapon, but barely. Start talking, he said. Lexandria nodded. I was part of a classified research team under a project called Quinleigh Storm. We developed bio-integrated enhancements for combat dogs, surgical alterations meant to increase reaction times and tissue regeneration. But the side effects, her voice faltered. They buried it, quietly, until now. She looked past him, toward the dim hallway. Your dog wasn't supposed to survive either. And now that he had, someone would come to finish what they started. Quinleigh Brax stared at Lexandria Vane, her words spinning in his mind like a storm that refused to settle. Bio-integrated enhancements, experimental surgery, government research. It sounded insane, and yet the proof was lying sedated on a table just down the hall. Jaxor was breathing, healing, changing, and not by any natural explanation. You're saying my partner was part of a project he was never supposed to survive? Quinleigh asked, his voice low, the anger barely restrained beneath it. Lexandria didn't flinch. He was implanted with a regenerative mesh, designed to accelerate healing in the field. But the mesh mutated. It bonded with his tissue unpredictably. Some of the dogs, their bodies shut down from the inside. Others went violent. One attacked his own handler. That's when they started terminating the subjects and wiping the records. She paused. Your dog must have been taken without your knowledge. Likely during a routine medical exam. Dr. Mavelyn Krue had joined them now, her face pale as she listened from the doorway. If what you're saying is true, she began carefully, then someone not only violated federal medical protocols, they used Quinleigh as partner for illegal trials. Lexandria nodded grimly. And if they find out he's still alive, especially with signs of regeneration, they won't let him stay that way. She held out the data chip. This is all I could save before I went off-grid. Names, files, implants, failure rates, including a name I think you'll recognize. Quinleigh took the chip and plugged it into the clinic's secure monitor. File after file scrolled across the screen, project logs, images of surgical procedures, medical scans. Then one folder blinked open, primary field operatives, handler class 3. His name appeared near the top, Brax, Quinleigh. Clearance level, civilian proxy. Next to it, subject assigned, Jaxor. Status, inactive, terminated. Quinleigh stepped back, his heart pounding. They think he's dead, Mavelyn whispered, which means the clock just started ticking, and as if to confirm it, the power inside the clinic suddenly cut. Darkness swallowed the room. Emergency backup lights blinked on. Outside, the low hum of an engine rumbled in the parking lot, but no headlights. Lexandria pulled a pistol from under her coat and handed it to Mavelyn. They're here. Quinleigh turned and ran to the exam room. Jaxor was awake now, eyes sharp, ears alert, body tense. He wasn't the same dying animal from before. He was ready, like he knew what was coming, and he wasn't going down without a fight. The emergency lights pulsed faintly through the clinic, casting everything in a soft, red hue. Quinleigh Brax moved quickly down the hallway toward Jaxor, his steps silent but urgent. The air was thick with electricity, not from the storm outside, but from something else. Instinct. Years on the force had taught him to trust that feeling. Tonight, it screamed louder than ever. Someone was here, And they weren't coming for answers, they were coming to erase them. Back in the lobby, Lexandria Vane took position near the front entrance, her weapon drawn and aimed low. Mavelyn Krue stayed behind the reception desk, pulling open a locked cabinet where they stored sedatives, and a small, outdated revolver she kept hidden, just in case. She checked the cylinder. For bullets, it would have to be enough. Her hands trembled slightly, but her resolve didn't. Outside, a black SUV idled with its headlights off. Two figures stepped out, both in plain dark clothing, no badges, no insignias. Just silence and precision. They moved to the back of the building, flashlights turned off, weapons drawn. The perimeter cameras already disabled. Whoever they were, they'd done this before. One tapped an earpiece. Moving in now. Objective is still inside. Quinleigh crouched beside Jaxor, gently placing a hand on the dog's side. Jaxor looked up at him, fully alert now, his breathing measured. "You ready?" Quinleigh whispered. The shepherd gave the faintest growl in response. Not of pain, but of warning. His instincts were back, sharp as ever. Quinleigh slid his sidearm from its holster, eyes scanning the door. "Let them come," he muttered. "We're not going anywhere." Suddenly, the back window shattered. A sharp crack followed by rushing air and the sound of boots hitting tile. The first intruder was inside. Lexandria fired a single shot down the hallway as a warning, forcing the man to take cover behind the break room door. "They're not here to negotiate," she called out. Quinleigh stood now, placing himself between Jaxor and the entrance to the exam room. "Then we hold the line." But as the second intruder circled toward the emergency exit, something unexpected happened. Jaxor stood up on all fours. Not shaky, not confused. Strong. Focused. He moved to Quinleigh's side, teeth bared, eyes trained on the sound beyond the door. It was no longer about survival, it was about protecting what was his. And no amount of training could prepare them for a dog that had already died. And come back stronger. The first intruder moved fast through the hallway, sweeping corners with calculated precision. He wasn't a thug. He was trained, government or private, Quinleigh Brax couldn't tell yet. But the way he hugged the wall and aimed high said one thing. This wasn't a recovery mission. It was a cleanup. Eliminate the dog. Eliminate the witnesses. Quinleigh stayed low beside the exam room door, counting footsteps. 1, 2, pause. The man was waiting for sound. Jaxor growled softly, his body low and ready, muscles tight beneath his coat. Then the second intruder broke through the rear door, forcing Lexandria Vane to reposition near the supply closet. She returned fire once. A warning, striking the wall inches from the man's shoulder. He ducked behind a file cabinet but didn't retreat. Mavelyn Krue, crouched behind the reception desk, whispered through clenched teeth. "They're closing in." Her voice cracked, not from fear, but from sheer disbelief. This was a veterinary clinic, not a battlefield, and yet it had become both. Quinleigh knew they couldn't hold out forever. Jaxor couldn't be moved easily, not with the four still in. But as he reached for the line to disconnect it, something stunned him. The wound on Jaxor's abdomen, the one that had nearly ended him, was gone. The stitches had dissolved, the skin sealed, not scarred, healed. Fully. Quinleigh looked at Mavelyn across the room. "Did you?" She shook her head, eyes wide. Before they could process it, the first intruder made his move. He kicked open the door to the exam room, and that was all the opening Jaxor needed. With a guttural snarl, he lunged. The man fired, but the shot went wide. Jaxor hit him mid-chest, teeth sinking into the man's forearm as they crashed into the metal tray stand. Quinleigh moved in, disarming the intruder with a swift elbow and pinning him to the ground. Jaxor didn't release until Quinleigh gave the order. The man lay groaning, blood soaking through his sleeve. Lexandria yelled from the front. "Second one's flanking. Window." But it was too late. The second man burst through the side door and froze. Not at the guns. Not at Quinleigh, but at Jaxor, his face drained of color. "That's not possible," he whispered, backing away. "They said he was terminated." Lexandria raised her weapon. "Then you didn't do your job." He dropped the gun and ran. The second intruder didn't get far. As he fled through the side hallway, Lexandria Vane gave chase, her footsteps echoing against the tile floor. Quinleigh Brax stayed back with Mavelyn and Jaxor, kneeling beside the first attacker, who now coughed violently, blood on his lips. "You were supposed to clean up the evidence," Quinleigh growled. "But you weren't expecting him to get back up, were you?" The man didn't answer. His eyes locked on Jaxor, not in fear, but something else. Regret. Jaxor sat beside Quinleigh now, alert but strangely calm. The glow in his eyes had changed, deeper, more aware. His breathing was steady, wounds gone, body stronger than before. Mavelyn could hardly believe what she was seeing. "This isn't just accelerated healing," she whispered. "It's like his system is rewriting itself." She looked at Quinleigh, her voice trembling with a new kind of fear. "This isn't recovery. It's evolution." Moments later, Lexandria returned, dragging the second man by the collar. Caught him trying to call for backup. He's ex-agency. No insignia, wiped ID, but definitely trained. She tossed a sleek, encrypted phone onto the table. One message queued. Never sent. Quinleigh grabbed the phone and unlocked the screen with Lexandria's bypass chip. One phrase appeared in the text box. Subject JX-9 is still alive. Phase 2 failed. Mavelyn read it aloud and froze. Phase 2. Lexandria looked at the two men. "Start talking. What is Phase 2? The second man laughed bitterly, even with Lexandria's gun pointed at his chest. "You think he's the only one?" He tilted his head toward Jaxor. "He was just the prototype. They kept the real subjects in a black site outside Brixtonia Vale. Off-grid. Underground. Once the program was shut down, they were supposed to be destroyed." He coughed, then added, "Not all of them were." Quinleigh felt like the floor had dropped beneath him. "You're saying there are more dogs like Jaxor out there? Alive?" The first man, still bleeding, looked at Quinleigh for the first time. "Some didn't survive the modifications. Others adapted. Changed." His voice dropped. "But if Jaxor triggered Phase 2, they'll be activated." Silence fell over the room. Outside, the storm had started again. Heavy rain hammering the roof like war drums. Jaxor rose to his feet, slowly walking to the glass door. He looked out into the darkness, tail still, ears high. He sensed something out there, something coming, and it wasn't human. The rain outside turned violent, slashing against the clinic windows in sharp sheets. The lights flickered again, the backup battery beginning to drain. Inside, Quinleigh Brax, Mavelyn Krue, and Lexandria Vane stood around the restrained intruders, their minds racing. But Jaxor remained focused, eerily so. He hadn't moved from the glass door, his gaze locked on the woods beyond the parking lot. Not barking, not growling, just waiting, watching. Lexandria checked the signal jammer she'd activated earlier. If any of those other subjects are still active, and if Phase 2 truly triggered, we might have just lit a beacon straight to this place. Mavelyn swallowed hard. "How many?" The second intruder smirked, blood on his lip. "They never told us. Could be 5, could be 20. But they were all modified differently, depending on what traits they wanted enhanced. One had olfactory processing 4 times stronger than Jaxor. Another didn't need eyes at all." Quinleigh's stomach turned. He looked down at Jaxor, who now stepped forward, nose twitching, ears tense. Then, without warning, Jaxor let out a low, guttural growl, deeper than any sound they'd heard from him before. It wasn't aggression. It was warning, a signal. Something was coming, something familiar to him, and dangerous. Quinleigh grabbed his rifle from the locker near the door. "We need to move. Now." Mavelyn began packing what supplies she could, hard drives, vials of Jaxor's blood samples, her scan logs. "If we don't get this data out, no one will believe it," she said. Lexandria nodded. "There's someone in Xandriak's Colt's network, a private server operator named Rileyetta Knox. She can help us go public. If we make it there." Quinleigh turned to the back of the clinic. "Load the truck. I'll cover the exit." But as he opened the door to the rear alley, his heart stopped. A second set of eyes stared back at him, glowing, yellow, unblinking. Not human, not Jaxor. Another dog, massive, taller than Jaxor by a full head. Dark fur, surgical scars across its flank, and a mechanical brace fused to its left hind leg. Stepped forward, silent, methodical, not aggressive. Yet, Jaxor moved behind Quinleigh and growled, but not out of fear. Recognition. This wasn't just another experiment. It was one of them, from before, from Brixtonia Vale. The other dog didn't attack. It stared for a long second, then turned and disappeared into the storm. But before it vanished, it looked back, not at Jaxor, but at Quinleigh, as if to say, "This isn't over. It's only begun." The next morning came in silence, broken only by the distant hum of helicopters far above the treetops. Quinleigh Brax stood on a ridge outside the city limits, his boots buried in wet grass, eyes fixed on the winding road below. Behind him, hidden in the shadows of an old ranger outpost, Mavelyn Krue and Lexandria worked quickly to upload the encrypted files to Rileyetta Knox's off-grid satellite link. Everything they had, the scans, the audio, the personnel names, the truth was about to go live. Jaxor sat beside Quinleigh, calm, focused, no longer showing any sign of the near-death collapse from 2 nights before. His coat glistened in the early light, the surgical scars now faded. Something inside him had changed permanently. He wasn't just a survivor, he was something new. But his loyalty remained untouched. He never strayed far from Quinleigh's side, as if knowing that the danger wasn't behind them yet. It had simply changed shape. Back inside the outpost, the screen blinked once, then confirmed, "Upload complete." Lexandria exhaled, finally allowing her shoulders to drop. The world will know now. They can't bury it again. Mavelyn nodded, closing the terminal. But they'll try. People like that always do. Lexandria looked toward the horizon. Then we stay moving, stay hidden, until it's time to fight differently. She turned to Quinleigh. "You coming with us?" Quinleigh didn't answer right away. He looked down at Jaxor, who stared back with eyes that understood more than any animal should. This wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about control, about what people with power were willing to sacrifice in the name of progress, and who they were willing to sacrifice to get there. Quinleigh finally looked back up. "No, we're staying here. If they come for us again, they'll find we're not done." Lexandria placed a hand on his shoulder, just for a moment. "You've got allies now. Don't forget that." Then she disappeared into the tree line, Mavelyn right behind her, their silhouettes swallowed by the forest. Quinleigh stood alone with Jaxor, the wind shifting gently through the leaves. As the sun broke through the clouds, Jaxor stepped forward and sat tall. His eyes scanned the hills, ears flicking to the sounds only he could hear. Quinleigh knelt beside him and rested a hand on his back. "No more commands," he whispered. "From now on, we decide what's right." And for the first time since that awful night in the clinic, Jaxor wagged his tail.